In this example, I want to cover the if-else statement with the AND operator. In this case, we are going to use pseudocode, and then you would need to convert that to the appropriate Python syntax so that you can run it in Python. Let's look at writing a program where you have 4 integers, which are input from a user. And we're going to look at those 4 numbers and determine which of those is the smallest. So I have the pseudocode here, and pseudocode is when you want to plan out the logic of the program, and you do it in more of an English-like format, and then once you have nailed down the logic for the program, then you can convert it into Python syntax to, again, run in Python. So the first thing, let's say we've got these 4 numbers that have been input by the user. So we're going to input each one of these individually. So the first step is to declare the variables and retrieve from the user input the 4 variables. So each one will be a separate input statement. And while you do that, you want to convert it to an integer format. So within this, you're going to declare the variable, for example, number 1, and say that it's the integer format of whatever the user has input. Okay? So declare the variable and pull in the input statement and convert it to integer format. Okay, so let's say we've done that, and these are the 4 numbers that the user has entered. Next, we want to compare those numbers to see which one is the smallest. And what we're going to have to do is compare each number to each other number. So we're going to compare number 1 to number 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to say, is number 1 less than number 8? And is it less than number 5? And is it less than number 2 here? So in this case, 3 is less than 8 and it's less than 5, so those are met, those are true. However, 3 is not less than 2. So then we would need to compare each other number. So we would compare 8 and see if it's less than 3. It is not. But you can also see that 8 is not less than 5 or 2. It's actually the largest number. So that would be false, and then we would go on to compare the 5 here, which was entered as number 3. So 5 is not less than 3. It is less than 8, but it is not less than 2. So it would then go to compare the last one, number 4, which is a value of 2. And it would print that value. So if it is true that the number is the smallest one, it will print that number as the output. Okay, so let's look at that in pseudocode. First, we want to compare, is the number 1 the smallest number? In doing so, we're going to use an if statement. Since we have to compare it to 3 other numbers, we're going to compare number 1 to 2, 3, and 4. We need to use an AND statement because it needs to be less than number 1, needs to be less than number 2, and less than number 3, and less than number 4 in order to be the smallest number. So in this case, we're going to do the comparisons. Is number 1 less than or equal to number 2? And is it less than or equal to number 3? And is it less than or equal to number 4? If all of those are true, because we use the AND statement, it will print number 1. However, in this case, it is not less than this one, so this is false. If this were true, it would print number 1, and it would exit out of the if function to whatever the next statement is after the if-else function. So it is false, and we're going to go to the next statement in the if function. With the if function, you're going to use the else if because you are going to make another comparison. So it's if this is not true, else if we're going to compare number 2 and do it the same way. Compare it to number 1, number 3, and number 4. If this is true, it will print number 2 and exit out of the if statement and that block of code. But in this case, 8 is not the smallest number, so it will go to the next statement and compare number 3 to 1, 2, and 4. Again, if it's true, we'll print that value. However, it is not, so we will go to the next else statement and say else, and we're going to say if all of the above are false, then number 4 is the smallest. The last statement is not an else if. These are just else if because we are making another comparison. The last one can just be the else statement. You don't need to make another comparison because if these 3 are not true, then we know that number 4 is true. So all you have to use here is the else statement. Now, when you do this in Python, make sure that you are inserting the correct syntax. Don't forget that the if statements, the if, else if, and the else, don't forget that those end in a colon. Okay, so in this case you'll have an if, else if, and the else, and just convert that syntax to Python.